For most of the modern galaxy, humanity existed only as a disputed footnote. In academic archives and data vaults, their name appeared inconsistently, often accompanied by disclaimers: records incomplete, source reliability low, species presumed extinct. Some historians argued humans were real but insignificant, a short-lived civilization erased before it could matter. Others claimed they were an allegory, a cautionary myth invented by early stellar societies to justify preemptive expansion. There were even those who insisted humanity was a mistranslation, an umbrella term mistakenly applied to several unrelated primate species from a single unstable world. Earth itself offered no clarification. Astronomical surveys confirmed that the system once marked as Sol was now an expanding cloud of debris, its fourth planet shattered beyond recovery. No ruins remained large enough to study. No signals, no survivors, no artifacts of consequence. By galactic standards, it was a clean extinction. Efficient. Forgettable. That efficiency became a lesson taught in military academies. Earth was cited as proof that technological acceleration without political unity led only to collapse. Humans, the instructors said, wasted their final centuries fighting one another while greater powers watched from a distance. When the end came, it was swift. A minor border conflict escalated. A miscalculated strike destabilized the planet. The galaxy barely noticed. Time passed. Empires rose and fell. Trade routes shifted. Humanity faded further into obscurity, mentioned only when scholars debated how many intelligent species had failed to leave a lasting mark. The prevailing conclusion was always the same: most of them. Yet not everyone agreed. A small but persistent group of xenoarchivists continued to flag inconsistencies. Orbital records from sectors near the former Sol system showed anomalies, minor gravitational discrepancies that didn't align with expected post-destruction models. Long-range probes occasionally returned corrupted data when passing near certain uninhabited worlds. Entire planets registered masses slightly higher than their visible composition suggested. These irregularities were logged, categorized, and ignored. After all, the galaxy was old. Space was messy. Not every mystery deserved attention. The dominant galactic powers certainly weren't interested. Their focus lay elsewhere: expansion quotas, resource optimization, population management. Species were evaluated by productivity and compliance. Worlds that resisted integration were pacified or erased, their loss justified as statistical necessity. No one invoked humanity during these deliberations. They were too small, too distant, too irrelevant. In public discourse, the destruction of Earth became a symbol stripped of emotion. Politicians referenced it to argue that resistance was futile. Philosophers cited it as evidence that intelligence alone did not guarantee survival. Military analysts used it to demonstrate how quickly a planet could be neutralized with sufficient force. Earth was no longer a tragedy. It was a case study. And case studies do not fight back. As centuries turned into millennia, even the debate over humanity's existence lost urgency. University councils voted to consolidate human-related research into a single archive node, citing low relevance. Funding was cut. Courses were discontinued. Students learned the name only in passing, if at all. The galaxy had moved on. Then the planets began to drift. At first, it was dismissed as sensor error. A barren world on the edge of a forgotten system altered its orbit by a fraction of a degree. Nothing dramatic. Nothing alarming. The correction algorithms adjusted. The charts updated. Days later, a second planet shifted. Then a third. The movements were subtle, synchronized just enough to feel wrong to those who noticed. Astrophysicists reviewed the data and frowned. These planets were ancient, cold, and geologically dead. No natural process could explain coordinated motion across separate systems. Gravitational influence from nearby stars was ruled out. Dark matter models failed to account for the precision involved. The planets weren't tumbling or decaying. They were repositioning. Still, no emergency was declared. The galaxy had a long history of unexplained phenomena that resolved themselves or proved harmless. Attention remained fixed on more immediate concerns: border skirmishes, population relocations, the quiet preparation for another large-scale cleansing on the outer rim. Only a handful of researchers began cross-referencing old records, digging deeper than most were willing to go. They compared the anomalous planets' locations with ancient star charts. Patterns emerged. The worlds were not random. They formed a lattice, spread across multiple regions, positioned near major transit routes and population centers. One archivist, nearing the end of her career, noticed something else. The earliest mass readings for several of these planets predated humanity's supposed extinction by centuries. The numbers had been logged, normalized, and forgotten. No one had questioned why a lifeless world carried more weight than it should. When she traced the data further back, she found references she wasn't meant to see: fragmented transmissions, untranslated logs, warnings marked obsolete. And in the margins of one corrupted file, a word that had not appeared in official discourse for thousands of years: human. The realization unsettled her, not because it proved humanity survived, but because it suggested something far more disturbing. If humans had truly vanished, then whatever altered those planets had been set in motion long before their end. Not in desperation. Not as a last stand. But deliberately, patiently, with a timeline that stretched far beyond their own existence. Around her, the galaxy continued as it always had, confident in its superiority, comfortable in its assumptions. Empires prepared to erase another species, certain there would be no consequence beyond temporary outrage and eventual silence. After all, history showed that extinction was permanent. And humanity, whatever it once was, had been extinct for a very long time. The first confirmation came quietly, buried in a routine deep-core scan of an uninhabited planet catalogued as inert for over 12,000 years. What the scan revealed should not have been possible. Beneath kilometers of ancient crust lay structures too precise, too symmetrical to be natural. Layered shells of composite alloys surrounded a core that was neither molten nor solid, but mechanical, dense with dormant systems waiting in perfect equilibrium. The finding triggered emergency cross-verification. Similar scans were ordered on other anomalous worlds. The results were identical. Different sizes, different locations, same internal architecture. These were not planets that had been modified. They were planets that had been built. As the data spread through scientific circles, disbelief turned into unease. The engineering required was beyond even the most advanced contemporary civilizations. Entire planetary masses had been disassembled, reforged, and reassembled with tolerances measured at the atomic level. Energy conduits ran through mantle layers like veins. Weapon systems lay folded into tectonic plates. Sensor arrays were woven into crustal strata, invisible from orbit and immune to erosion. Most disturbing of all was their age. Isotopic dating placed their construction far earlier than any known galactic superpower's rise. Long before the current empires. Long before standardized hyperspace travel. Long before humanity was supposed to have vanished. When translation AIs began decoding the recovered data fragments embedded deep within the planetary cores, the truth became unavoidable. The systems were human-made. The logic structures, the mathematical shortcuts, the redundancies layered on redundancies, everything bore the unmistakable signature of a species obsessed with contingency. Humanity had not been planning for victory. They had been planning for failure. The recovered logs were incomplete, but the intent was unmistakable. Humans had concluded that survival was not guaranteed, no matter how advanced they became. They had observed the galaxy long enough to understand a brutal constant: dominant civilizations eventually turned efficiency into cruelty, and cruelty into policy. Treaties failed. Alliances fractured. Moral outrage faded. Genocide, when dressed in technical language, became routine. So humans had chosen a different path. They built no empire. They left no fleets. They carved no borders. Instead, they invested their remaining centuries into something they called the Inheritance Protocol. A system designed to function without them, without maintenance, without oversight. It would not defend humanity. It would not preserve their culture. It would not even announce their existence. Its sole function was enforcement. Each planet-sized construct housed an autonomous intelligence bound by a single immutable directive. The protocol defined genocide with mathematical precision, population thresholds, intent analysis, irreversible harm metrics. No ambiguity. No room for political interpretation. When those thresholds were crossed, the system would respond automatically. Not immediately. Not emotionally. But with certainty. The warships were not mobile in the conventional sense. They did not travel the galaxy. They were the galaxy, placed strategically near critical nodes long before modern hyperspace routes existed. Their movement was subtle, governed by gravitational manipulation rather than propulsion. To untrained observers, their repositioning appeared as natural orbital drift. To the protocol, it was alignment. They were designed to wait. Millennia passed without activation. Entire species rose, dominated, and fell without ever triggering the threshold. Some came close. The systems recorded everything, learned continuously, refined their models. The silence stretched on, unbroken. Humanity disappeared during that silence. The logs made it clear that the inheritance protocol did not activate upon human extinction. That was not its purpose. The warships did not mourn. They did not react. Humanity's end was simply another data point confirming the premise the humans had already accepted, that even their own species was not exempt from the galaxy's indifference. What mattered was not who lived. What mattered was what was done. As more fragments were decoded, a pattern emerged in the human philosophy embedded within the machines. The systems did not value life abstractly. They valued restraint. They were not programmed to reward compassion, cooperation, or peace. They were programmed to punish a single act above all others, the deliberate, systematic erasure of an entire people. Humans had believed that if such an act carried an absolute, unavoidable cost, the galaxy would adapt. The warships carried no insignia. No recorded history of their creators. Even the word human appeared only once in the core directives, marked not as an identity, but as a variable, originator species, irrelevant to function. The protocol assumed that, one day, its existence would be discovered. That discovery was factored into its design. Knowledge alone would not trigger it. Fear alone would not activate it. Only action. As the scientific community absorbed the implications, panic spread upward through political hierarchies. Emergency councils convened. Militaries ran simulations and found none that ended favorably. These were not weapons that could be targeted or disabled. Their systems were too deeply integrated, too redundant, too distributed. Destroying one would require energies that would destabilize entire regions of space, and the protocol would interpret such an attempt as hostile escalation. Still, many leaders clung to denial. The galaxy had always assumed consequences could be managed, delayed, negotiated. This system allowed none of that. It did not negotiate. It did not issue warnings. It did not care who ruled. It only cared whether a line had been crossed. And as the data finished compiling, one final realization settled over every species that understood what humanity had left behind. The galaxy had not inherited human technology. It had inherited human judgment. And that judgment had been waiting, patiently, since before humanity itself became a memory. The threshold was crossed on a world that barely registered on most strategic maps. Its designation was numerical, its population statistics summarized in a single line, its resources already allocated to future extraction contracts. To the empire that targeted it, the system represented inefficiency, an occupied region producing less than projected, inhabited by a species deemed resistant to optimization. The decision was not framed as extermination. It never was. Official documents described it as a corrective measure, a recalibration of long-term stability. The species in question was labeled incompatible with galactic integration models. Their culture resisted assimilation. Their biology consumed resources disproportionately. Their continued existence, according to predictive algorithms, would create unrest along critical trade corridors. So the solution was finalized with administrative calm. Military fleets arrived without fanfare. Orbital platforms deployed sterilization arrays calibrated to minimize infrastructure damage while maximizing biological termination. Evacuation was never considered. Relocation was deemed inefficient. Within hours, atmospheric composition was altered beyond survivability. Cities fell silent. Oceans boiled slowly, methodically, until even microbial life collapsed. The Empire recorded the operation as a success. Across the galaxy, reactions were muted. Some governments issued formal statements of concern, carefully worded to avoid confrontation. Others updated their own models, noting the efficiency of the operation. A few species mourned privately, understanding that public grief carried risk. Most simply looked away. Genocide had become procedural. What none of them realized was that the act did not exist in isolation. The moment the final biological threshold was breached, data propagated through systems no one knew were listening. Signals passed not through conventional channels, but through the fabric of space itself, encoded in gravitational fluctuations too subtle to detect without purpose-built instruments. The inheritance protocol had begun its evaluation. Intent was confirmed first. The operation met all criteria: deliberate planning, irreversible outcome, total population erasure. Context was irrelevant. Justification was irrelevant. The protocol did not weigh motives. It did not calculate political necessity. It recognized only the act. Once confirmed, the response sequence initiated automatically. Across multiple regions of the galaxy, planets long considered inert adjusted their mass distribution. Internal systems awakened after millennia of dormancy, their diagnostics completing in fractions of a second. Energy reservoirs filled to operational capacity. Sensor networks unfolded from within planetary crusts, mapping surrounding space with absolute precision. There was no alert. No warning pulse. No declaration of intent. Hyperlane traffic was the first to fail. Vessels attempting transit near the affected sectors vanished or re-emerged catastrophically off course, their drives torn apart by localized distortions. Navigation systems began reporting impossible readings. Established routes collapsed as if they had never existed. Entire regions of space became inaccessible within minutes. Military command structures scrambled to understand the cause. The Empire's analysts suspected sabotage, experimental weapons, natural anomalies, anything that fit within familiar frameworks. Fleets were mobilized. Countermeasures deployed. None of it mattered. Then the planets moved. Not dramatically. Not with spectacle. They adjusted position with deliberate restraint, aligning themselves along vectors that intersected critical Imperial infrastructure. Their gravitational fields overlapped, forming invisible barriers that cut off reinforcement routes and isolated command hubs from one another. Orbital weapon platforms targeting the anomalous worlds fired first. Their strikes impacted planetary crusts and vanished, absorbed by layered shielding that redistributed energy into harmless dissipation. No return fire followed. The silence was unnerving. Moments later, Imperial command centers went dark. Not destroyed. Disabled. Power grids collapsed under precisely targeted gravitational shear. Data cores were rendered unreadable as quantum states decohered beyond recovery. Communication arrays ceased functioning simultaneously, severing the Empire's ability to coordinate across systems. Military fleets found themselves intact but blind, armed but directionless. Panic spread through civilian populations as infrastructure failed. Transport halted. Defense systems shut down. The Empire's strength, built on centralized control and rapid response, unraveled in hours. Only then did the warships act directly. Focused gravitational pulses tore through shipyards and weapons depots, collapsing structures without harming surrounding civilian habitats. Fleets that attempted to regroup were pinned in place, their mass locked within manipulated space-time wells. Command vessels were neutralized with surgical precision, their crews left alive but powerless. The protocol made no effort to minimize fear among leadership. It made every effort to minimize collateral harm. As the scale of the response became clear, the galaxy understood what was happening, even if it could not yet explain it. This was not war. There were no objectives to seize, no territory to claim. The response followed a logic utterly divorced from conquest. It was punishment. Across every active frequency, a transmission began to play. It did not repeat. It did not demand acknowledgement. It carried no symbol or signature recognizable to modern powers. The message was brief, stripped of rhetoric, translated instantly into every known language. A single statement, followed by a definition. The statement explained that a line had been crossed. The definition clarified which line. It described genocide not as a crime against law or morality, but as a trigger condition. It stated that enforcement was automatic, unavoidable, and final. It made no reference to humanity by name. It did not threaten further action. It did not offer mercy. It simply explained the consequence. As abruptly as it had begun, the transmission ended. The Empire attempted retaliation anyway. Desperation overrode reason. Orders were given to deploy planet-cracking weapons against the anomalous worlds. The weapons never reached their targets. Space-time folded around them, redirecting their destructive potential inward, erasing the launch platforms instead. Within a single rotation cycle, the Empire ceased to function as a coherent power. Its world still existed. Its people still lived. But its ability to project force, to organize mass violence, to erase others without consequence, was gone. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the realization settled. This was not an anomaly. It was a system. And it had been waiting for someone to prove that it was necessary. When the response ended, the galaxy did not celebrate. There were no victory declarations, no chants of liberation, no symbols raised in triumph. What followed was quieter and far more profound. The planetary constructs did not advance further. Having completed their enforcement sequence, they began a controlled withdrawal, not retreat, but realignment. Gravitational fields relaxed. Space-time distortion smoothed. Hyperlanes slowly reformed along stable vectors, though many would never match their original paths. The warships returned to dormancy, resuming their disguise as lifeless worlds drifting through ancient orbits. They left nothing behind that could be studied, copied, or reverse-engineered. The empire they dismantled still existed in fragments. Its former territories remained populated, its citizens alive, its worlds intact. What was gone was cohesion. Central command nodes had been erased too thoroughly to rebuild. Military doctrines based on overwhelming force were rendered useless without the infrastructure to support them. The tools required for genocide, coordination, secrecy, speed, had been stripped away with surgical finality. For the first time in recorded galactic history, an empire survived its crime but lost the ability to repeat it. That outcome was not accidental. The inheritance protocol had been designed with restraint as carefully as it had been designed with power. Humanity had not sought vengeance. They had sought correction. The punishment was calibrated to sever capability, not to satisfy anger. The galaxy was not meant to burn. It was meant to learn. And it did. In the cycles that followed, policy across the stars changed in ways no treaty had ever achieved. Expansion doctrines were rewritten. Predictive models were adjusted to include a new variable, one that could not be bribed, threatened, or negotiated with. Military academies quietly removed courses that framed population eradication as a viable strategy. Political leaders discovered that euphemisms no longer provided safety. The definition had been broadcast once. Everyone remembered it. Worlds previously considered expendable gained new strategic importance simply by existing. Species on the brink of elimination were suddenly reclassified as protected, not by law, but by consequence. The fear was not of invasion or conquest. It was of activation. The planets remained silent. That silence became the most powerful deterrent the galaxy had ever known. Attempts were made to locate the origin of the constructs, to trace their creators more precisely. Ancient human data fragments were analyzed again and again. But there was nothing more to find. Humanity had erased itself from the system deliberately. No memorials. No monuments. No message asking to be remembered. They had not wanted gratitude. They had wanted permanence. Over time, the debate shifted. Scholars no longer asked whether humans had truly existed. That question lost relevance. Existence, after all, could be temporary. Impact was not. The warships did not prove that humans had survived. They proved that humans had anticipated a galaxy that would outlive them, and had judged it in advance. In some corners of space, humanity became something close to a legend again. Not a story of heroes or conquerors, but of architects. A species that looked at the patterns of history, recognized inevitability, and chose to intervene not with presence, but with structure. They had accepted their own extinction as a possibility. And in doing so, they ensured genocide would never again be. The planets continued their watch, unseen and unacknowledged. Their systems remained alert, their calculations ongoing. They did not differentiate between species, power blocks, or ideologies. They tracked only actions. Intent. Outcome. Somewhere, someday, the threshold might be crossed again. If it was, the response would be the same. No warning. No negotiation. No exception. Humanity would not return to argue its case. It would not rise from the dead to demand recognition. It would not need to. Its final decision had already been made, encoded into worlds and written into the behavior of the stars themselves. The galaxy would go on without humans. But it would never again pretend it could erase a people without consequence. Not because humanity was watching, but because humanity had already finished preparing the punishment.